Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary art space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. Our next In Conversation with Nicole Callahan and Zoe Ryder-White is on November 11th. Please check our website at thenotebookscollective.com to see all the details, and please stay tuned as we'll be announcing our 2026 season soon. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmunk, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their cultures, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. As we do this acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror across the globe and in our own country. Our thoughts are with them. We know that these are extremely stressful times, and we are glad that you have joined us tonight to celebrate community. And now I want to welcome Rebecca to introduce our presenters.
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Rebecca. I am the other half of the Notebooks Collective with Lisa, and I'm so excited to introduce our speakers tonight. Things have been crumbling lately, leaves, laws, institutions, and when things get crumbly, I look to poetry. Poems show me things have fallen apart before and new promises have emerged. And in that, I find hope. In the books that will be discussed tonight, All the Possible Bodies and Previously Owned, there are unsteady foundations, questions, missing text. Through the speakers, these voices wrestle with family and identity, anger at failed institutions, and the American gaslighting that racism has been solved. The speakers use myth and history to bracket themselves. And if this sounds dire, it is. And it's also the faith that we are all still here, that there is beauty and love and power in telling our own stories. Even when Iain's and Nathan's words punched me in the gut, I was transformed. And that's what it's about, right? Feeling the feeling of others, learning we are not alone, and nurturing that hope. Iain's been teaching us that we are not alone for a while. He was our mentor at Solstice. We've learned so much from him and will continue to learn, not in a classroom or workshop, but through his words and the way he moves through the community we share. And through his introduction to us of new to us poets like Nathan, whose own poetry and literary citizenship teaches us new lessons and reinforces others. To say that we're lucky is an understatement. To that end, I will now read the official bios and we'll get on our way. Iain Haley Pollock is the author of 3 poetry collections, Spit Back a Boy, Ghost Like a Place, and All the Possible Bodies. He has received several honors for his work, including the Cave Canem Poetry Prize, the Alice Faye de Castagnola Award from the Poetry Society of America, a NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellowship in Poetry, the Bim Ramke Prize for Poetry, and a nomination for an NAACP Image Award. His poems have appeared in many literary outlets, including African American Review, American Academy of Poets, Poem a Day, American Poetry Review, the Kenyon Review, the New York Times Magazine, poetrysociety.org, and The Progressive. Outside of publishing poems, Pollock has performed his work widely, from the Dodge Poetry Festival to libraries and art centers. He curated the Rye Poetry Path, a public poetry installation in Rye, New York. He serves on the editorial board of Slapering Hol Press and on the board of Tiger Bark Press. And he edits the literary journal Inkwell. Pollock directs the MFA Program in creative writing at Manhattanville University in Purchase, New York, and he lives in the Lower Hudson Valley. Nathan McClain is a poet, editor, and educator living in Amherst, Massachusetts. He is the author of Scale and Previously Owned, and his poems and prose have recently appeared or are forthcoming in Poetry Northwest, Green Mountains Review, Poem a Day, The Common, The Critical Flame, and Upstreet, among others. He's assistant professor of creative writing and African American literary arts at Hampshire College and serves as poetry editor at the Massachusetts Review. I'm so pleased to welcome Iain and Nathan.
you. Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction, the very thoughtful introduction. I'm going to start things off. I'm not hogging the spotlight from Nathan. I'll start things off and then we'll kick it over to Nathan. I was coming into this, I was feeling pretty proud of the two of you for creating this community in the way that I think teachers are often proud of their students. But that introduction was so meaningful to me, and just like the attention you're paying to the moment and to both of our work was so important. So thank you for having me, and thank you for engaging with the work. And always, since I've known you, always engaging with poetry more broadly. I'm going to read 5 poems for folks. Nathan will read some poems, and then we'll have a conversation, and we'll punctuate that with poems as well. You want a little practice to go along with your theory. The first poem focuses on my mother, and in large part, she was a classics professor at Hamilton College, so she's taught Latin and Greek, in addition to women's studies and Africana studies. Hamilton sits on a hill overlooking the town of Clinton, New York, which factors into the poem. I also mentioned in passing a bit of Philadelphia city history, the move bombing in the 1980s, when the Philadelphia Police Department dropped an incendiary device on the headquarters of a Black liberation group that was in a standoff with the police. And that, when you drop a bomb on row houses, you end up burning the entire city block, right? There's some Greek myths in here, especially early on, but I think if I've done this right, you can understand the thrust of the poem without knowing the details of the myth. A Black mother's child considers his lost dream of immortality. 1. What was she hoping I'd learn? What lessons when my mother, who taught Greek at the college on the hill, read their old stories to me? To be ready one night for hooded snakes to crawl into my cradle, to leave a trail of twine behind me as I walked the labyrinthian corridors of my country, not to raise the wrong sail whenever I came home to her, not to dive as the swan and plummet into a woman bathing in the seclusion of high reeds, not to be the shock and awe of white wings. For me, though, the truth in the myth was this: power transforms into life, and life forever. And when my mother was finished, all I wanted was to live as those changing but unchanging gods. 2. The white man who taught me Greek hated me. He thought I was lazy. I admit that I often slept through his morning class, often stumbled through his translations as a boar through deep sudden snow. My mother cried when she left me in the parking lot of that place, cried harder than I'd seen since the week after her father died. I think she had learned that no Black mother can save her children. Save them, as you have proven and are still proving, America, from your primitive, bullhorned violence. And so, more days than not, her son stood beside an aluminum keg, fermenting himself, pouring into his gullet a river not of forgetfulness, but of an urgent forgetting. 3. My mother wanted to learn Latin on her way to Greek, but the teachers had her pegged to cook and sew. Short but thick-set, the school's own former football hero, her father traded on his glory, the scars earned for it, on his hobbled knees, the slight slur of his speech, to demand a place for her in a room of primers and chalkboards. They thought she should scurry about the rooms of your house, America, picking up what you had dropped, but she overcame to stand at the front of a room, professor of language and myth. I told a version of this story to Black children at a school in Philadelphia. When I came to the end, my mother, teaching Greek at the college on the hill, they rose from their chairs and applauded her through the proxy of me. I think now I lied to them while standing in a room across town from where you firebombed a city block to save yourself. America, you've eaten your children to keep your place on the honeyed mountaintop. If you have not already, you will consume these children too, And still you will come with wild, ravenous hunger for more. And why do you keep doing what you do? And what will you do one day when instead of a child, you swallow a stone? The second poem is an ekphrastic poem, so it's written in response to a piece of visual art. And that piece is by the artist Ken Gonzalez Day, who took photographs of lynchings and removed the victim from the image. So all you have left is the landscape and the perpetrators of the crime of the lynching. Deep down, every sinner. The subject of the dream is the dreamer, Toni Morrison. The night and the tree were always and never about us. We could have been any bodies a shade darker than destiny manifest, and the crime alleged could have been real or imagined. The rape by the muddy riverbank, or the phantom wolf whistle, the glance seen to linger like a stain no washing scrubs out. Death came long before our neck bones snapped like so much deadfall beneath a boot's heel, long before the rope's rough sissel collapsed our windpipes. The precise moment of our dying was the hour they turned our dark bodies into sign and signifier for the savage instinct and base desire they dreamed lurking at the center of them. You see it best when we let force of habit take over and leave ourselves invisible. With us gone, all that exists beyond the spare, singular trunk of the hanging tree is the vacuous night sky, starless in the camera's gaze. You see it too in them who gathered to watch us made human effigy of the breached commandments they could not confess. How many of them look back toward the camera? Deep down, every sinner wants his sin seen. We did not need to be there for this laying bare, but we were, indelibly. The fiction could not happen without us, nor waking from fiction into the delusional sunlight of their daily lives. We were there. We are here, real and imagined, as the creaking of boughs under an unseen weight, under a wind unseen, but felt along the creased and nervous terrain of the skin. As Rebecca mentioned in my bio, I had the chance to curate a poetry path in a town across the county from me. And in the process of curating that, I was also inspired to write a poem. And I'm become sort of interested in like the public utility and the public good of poems and having them in public spaces. So this poem is in a wildlife sanctuary. It's actually behind a big amusement park called Playland, if you're familiar with the Long Island Sound suburbs of New York. On a different day. On a different day, I'd see the cormorants resting on these moldering pilings as sign of the once and future ruin surrounding me always. On this day, I take joy in the ebb and flow that I both know and cannot know. Cormorants perch where earlier a woman wanting to know the rhythm of tidal water launched her rowboat into a nursing lake. On some future day, perhaps this water will crest over the trail and no one will stand where I stand now. No death to all this, just some life become other life. On this day, the sodden wood of a ruined dock wastes more away, and a quartet of cormorants scans the reeds in the nearby salt marsh. And the saline air calms my lungs. And behind me, the high tide sound lambasting the rock-strewn shore of the point seems an abstract rumble. And for today, I want no more purpose than this. In some America, a gun. pin oak leaves turned maroon, then dried brown, and in late autumn they fell. All winter I waited for their green return, into early spring. They are green now, outside the window on the classroom south wall, greener for the day's clear blue scrim of sky. Through the east wall's window, open to mid-spring heat, I can hear the younger children screeching on the playing field up the hill. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, in some America, a gun in a child's hand has killed, is killing, will kill other children. Yesterday, the killed children were the age of my youngest child. Today, they are the age of my oldest. How old will the children be tomorrow? I imagine their eyes, late autumn, winter, early spring, dilated with fear, or narrow with no capacity to understand. The killer's mind, a hailstorm of anger and confusion. I cannot imagine it. I am sitting in a classroom. The pin oak outside the window has come back to green. The gun in the child's hand killed teachers too. This, a teacher's job, yesterday, today, tomorrow, in some America, to die wrapped in our children. Late autumn, winter, early spring, teachers dead among our children. In some America, the killer, the gun, in the doorway to her classroom, a teacher, below windows hung with their wild art, under their small desks, children. How old will they be tomorrow? If you speak French, you are going to know how badly I'm going to butcher the title of this next poem. I do not speak French, but I felt like French is the language of dance. And so I went for it. I'm trying to say dance of spring in quarantine. Dance printemps et quarantaine. Near the end of my run, before the road turns steeply uphill toward the house, I see a girl alone on her front lawn. The day is beautiful, cloudless and cerulean, the latest in a string of beautiful days. The girl has wound her long black hair into a tight bun and wears brown, plastic-framed glasses, not unlike my own, and dances. If she's dancing to music, I can't hear it. But then I don't listen too intently. I want her to be dancing to music only she can hear. I imagine the virus has kept her out of a studio for months. I imagine she has danced only in her basement or to the blue glare of a computer screen disconnected from the other dancers. Besides plie, I do not have the language of dance to describe the few moves she performs while I run past. And the last one I catch, a cubist discombobulation of limbs, she arches her back until her hands touch the ground, then throws each leg separately over her head in a movement that would, if I attempted it, break into pieces my embrittled body. Whatever I become from here, I always want to be this girl. Dancing, I suppose, yes, dancing while people are dying, not out of callow or callous indifference, but in celebration of the dead. Celebration expressed as survival. Survival expressed as a claimant act of love, an act not native only to me, but practiced until it resides in me, muscle and sinew, an imperfect act that is the only one I can think to do. Dancing. Dancing until the imagined company of dancers spins and bends around me, until the music others cannot hear renders itself visible in my body. Dancing until each passerby believes again in cloudless and cerulean, again in this day and the possibility of the next. Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my man, Nathan McClain.
Hey, thank you so much, Ian. Just really incredibly honored to be here in the space with you. Thank you so much to Lisa and Rebecca for just putting all of this together. Thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening. And I just couldn't think of anyone better to share this space with, to share this evening with. And I'm excited to be just to be in conversation with you, which I think I always am, just in terms of the work that we do together. So really grateful for yet another opportunity. I'm going to read just 4 poems before Ian and I jump into our conversation, and I'm sure there will be some some shared and connected and interwoven themes that we'll touch on. This first poem is entitled "The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn." The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was first banned in Concord, Massachusetts in 1885. If you haven't read it, it's the story of 2 runaways, one from an abusive drunk, the other slavery. Not a terribly strange story. A boy leaves home, flees the few bed sheets snapping on the clothesline that appear to be ghosts. But these days, everyone is haunted by something. A smile, the thing someone said. I live in Amherst, Massachusetts, haunted by the name of the Lord Geoffrey Amherst, who, it has been said, distributed smallpox-infected blankets and handkerchiefs to Native Americans, he might have said savages, surrounding his fort. How many stories open that way, with some simple exchange, with some naming? Bee, bullfrog, catalpa, lily pad, nigger. Even now, see how a name can stick or swapped like a stick. I was never assigned Huck Finn when I was a kid, and my kid has never read it, though had she may have read the version that exchanges nigger for slave, a softening, so they say, like inventing a farm upstate for the dog that, maybe having tracked some far-off sound or movement, has been crushed by a speeding car. Bad dog. A dog needs a lot of space to run with other dogs, and without a leash, you explain. Even a child, you think, should understand that.
Yeah, he did. I think it was there first.
At the park, a boy's birthday party. You may see a couple of bombs from my children as well. So that'll happen. At the park, a boy's birthday party. No surprises here, really. Not the plastic white cutlery or the fancy glass bowl, cubes of pineapple embossed pear floating in punch, naturally red, that no one, thank the Lord, has thought yet to spike. Each boy, blindfolded, spun in place and shoved down the piñata's path with a bat he could barely lift. The piñata, star-shaped, tasseled pink at its ends, seems accurate. At this age, their limbs inarticulate as the smoke of catfish or pork ribs that hiss on the park grill. They hardly notice the sun's descent. It's getting late, I think, to say, as someone's father knots the blindfold over my eyes, fits the bat into my hands. In my ear, the boys shriek, and there, the star, snagged in the oak of my mind, the rope swaying, almost gently. How, even dizzied, do I step towards hope? This next poem is from where this collection also gets its title. The poem is titled Multiple Choice. Dull, bulky, previously owned. It was usually tucked in my backpack, next to algebra or earth science and my gym shorts, U.S. history. Some old scene drawn on the cover. There was a teacher, a classroom number. I was this many years old. There was time which was set aside every day. I had a locker, a combination. I sat at a distance that softened the edges of white chalk on the board. Poor vision. Though even that didn't make me much care to commit the past to memory except to darken the right bubble on the test sheet. Christopher Columbus discovered America in blank. The Declaration of Independence was first signed by blank. Blank assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Answers were simple and dependable, black and white. You were remembered for better or worse for what you did, what you refused to do. So every year, Rosa Parks sat unmoved, Dr. King dreamed, and I recorded it as if for the first time. I've heard textbook sometimes used to describe an act as flat and predictable as a stretch of country road. Miles of the same cow lying in cut grass, slowly chewing cud with the effort or patience it might take to grind the difficulty of any fact down. Or any fact down. Robert E. Lee surrendered at blank to end the Civil War. At the end, my mother once said, every battle is lost by someone, has its casualties, bronze monuments erected to the story, or some other old scene just as dull and clunky. Until blank, years before I met my wife, I could have been dragged off for simply glancing at her, which I do often and too long. The moral? Who knows? Maybe, if you're lucky, you outlive the usefulness of such knowledge. Besides, it's a new world. I own the Riverside Shakespeare, 2 biographies of Coleridge, my shelves lined with the past and its usual despairs, its joys as well. Sometimes I look, sometimes I get swept up in all the looking. There is rain, someone returns home, a letter arrives with the expected news, a cat on the windowsill, asleep, my wife in a rocking chair, quietly reading. Everyone keeps asking when we will finally have a baby, because it's a thing we can choose now. I mean, how lucky is that? And I'll close this segment with a slightly newer poem that I've been sort of working towards. This poem is called it's funny, and I'm sure Ian and I will get into this. I've likely written about fatherhood for so much of my writing career thus far. I don't think I will ever not write about fatherhood, but with my current sort of like 2 younger children, it's amazing to recognize some of the things that come out of your mouth as you say them. And this is one of those instances in which I heard myself say something and knew that I would have to utterly write about it. This poem is called I Don't Want to Be Colored. I don't want to be colored, he said or heard himself say, but after having picked her up already, not seeing the crayon until she'd marked his cheek with the blunt thing. The crayon worked something like a chisel in a chunk of rock. I know you heard me. Chiseling away at what must have been lodged underneath, each stroke, jagged and purple, curling into a spiral-like shape, a solid line, coiled tight, though not quite circular, no part connected, mind you. Her mind made no such connections, you see, not yet. Still just a girl, innocent, forgivable for now. So what choice did he have but to give himself up, turn the other cheek? What harm done anyhow? It looked, when shaded that way, a bit like acceptance or relief, didn't it? The crayon stripped of its wrapper and in her hand, fat as gladness. What choice did he have but to take that away? Thanks very much. All right, Iain, time to get to it.
Yeah, amazing reading, man, as usual.
Thank you. No, same to you, brother. Same to you.
I don't get tired of hearing those poems.
Yeah, excited to definitely to talk about the new book. I know you've been doing some events with it now, which is exciting. And at a certain point, I imagine kind of become like another reader of your own poems. But I know you've been living with much of this material for a long time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm just curious to hear how things, like, just starting out, just hear how things are going with just this new book being in the world. I know there's like that long kind of lead up period of like a preparation that gets made. But yeah, how's it been with just getting this book out in the world? Like, how are you feeling about it now that it's here?
Yeah, I feel great. I was also just in Philly, which is like my spiritual and artistic home. So it was good to read poems for Philly folks. So I'm kind of coming off the high of them, of those readings. But I think it's like what I have. I think poems are like what I have to offer to the discourse in this moment. I've kind of soured on like internet and social media discourse.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm yelling into the void or preaching to the choir, one or the other. But I think this, for me, getting out there and reading poems in spaces like this, and in all of the spaces I've been, has been a much more authentic form of dialogue for me.
Yeah.
Because I think a change has to happen. And I'm realizing that the only way that I can help that change happen is to get out there and see people face to face or screen to screen.
Yeah.
So it's actually made me feel, I mean, I think this is hard to say because I see like the headwinds and the obstacles, but being out and traveling and reading from the book has made me feel better about the country. I mean, I think there's a lot of good folks out there, but we're just so separate from one another, and we don't have time to really be in dialogue and be in conversation and be in community with each other. It's been a real privilege to be invited into so many communities and get to talk to people and break it down and share stories and share points of view and see what's happening, what's happening. So
Yeah.
I feel like American democracy will hold together because of the good people out there, even though I see like the real assaults happening to it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I know that that's something that we're both really thinking about in our work, and it's one of those things too. I was trying to explain to some of my students when it comes to that when we think about the way that we build metaphor, the way that we make images, that all of that comes out of our like lived and learned experiences, and it's like that in as much as I would love to, and I think that even in the newer poems that I'm writing, that they're still very much infused with a sort of with a joyfulness about being with my children and being with my family, but there's still also like that always the specter of this like fraught history that's like lurking in the background like a shadow.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I'm constantly having to sort of contend with. And in these sort of more recent work that I've been working on, it seems as though, especially in thinking about like fatherhood just from this different vantage, like I'm also thinking about like I'm also thinking about like the times in which I am ultimately going to be responsible for teaching my kids something before the world does.
Yeah.
And to do so too soon means to rob them of their innocence in some way, and to rob them of their wonder. And so, like, we talk about, I think, amongst like peoples of color and Black people in particular, about having to like sit your kid down and like have the talk, right? And that usually
Right.
that talk entails how to comport oneself if you are ever in the company of, or ever been stopped by the police. It's a terrible reality to have to subject your children to. I don't want to have that. I don't have to talk with my kids, but I know that at some point I'll have to sit them down and do so. And so as you're thinking about like the way that and you're talking about, like, doing a bit of traveling, getting out on the road, seeing some different places, which I love. In those poems that you read earlier, I was also like struck by thinking about like how prominent landscape is in the work. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you see that as different from your last collection, or if landscape is just as prominent, as prominent a character. But definitely like the American landscape, and obviously in some cases you're speaking directly to America. But
Yeah.
thinking about like how you are approaching like that sense of the pastoral, it's definitely something I was thinking about, and it's changed since I've moved to Western Massachusetts from, say, Los Angeles, or from New York. But
Yeah.
yeah, but
So I
how are
think
you
that
approaching that?
that's some of the answer to your question is like, I think I've always like I always want to situate my poems in a place, right? I always want to anchor the reader in a very concrete circumstance or location. Um, I think maybe the idea of landscape is more apparent because in writing from my life, which I tend to do, I'm now in the Hudson Valley, which
Yeah.
is, like riparian and bucolic in some places. And so like the natural landscape is like much more apparent and obvious to me. Whereas I think like the built environment, when I was
Mm.
living in Philly, like I was contending with the built environment. But so I think, which to me is no less of a landscape, right? So I think it's just maybe like more the natural landscape. I think is more apparent in the new work, but it's something I've always. It comes sort of organically out of something I've always been trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. I was sharing with I'm teaching a course right now. I'm teaching a first year seminar that's thinking about black nature, and which was
Right,
inspired by the anthology, Camille Dungy's anthology, though we're not using it in the course, but that's kind of where the course took its inspiration from. And among the things that I was explaining to them, a number of my students, like largely students, it's like, I teach at Hampshire College. It's a primarily white institution. Most of my students are going to be white. I think I have maybe one black student in this class. They're all first years, and many of them told me that they took the course because there were writers that were on the course description that they had never heard of, and they were wondering like
interesting.
why, yeah, wondering why like these black writers, like they just many of them just hadn't been exposed in as much as they've had such like so much contact with environmentalism and with the environmental world and with the natural landscapes. They had no idea that, like, they had no idea who Jericho Brown was. They had no idea
Yeah,
who Paul Laurence Dunbar was, or who or who any of these, like any of our like Ursula K. Le Guin, like they hadn't heard of some of these writers. And so some of them took the course like out of sheer curiosity,
right.
but and it's been really eye-opening for me to see their own sort of like race consciousness, like being raised by engaging with those materials. But when I was explaining to them, and I think this is related to the question that I had for you earlier, I was explaining to them like the difference of what we see in a poem that's by Thylias Moss versus a poem by Robert Frost or by William Wordsworth is that like for this, for this poet, a tree isn't simply a tree,
Right.
like a dog isn't simply a dog, and we have to constantly think about the natural world, or at least Black people are constantly thinking about the natural world also within the context of what others have done with nature and how they've used nature against others. And so that's certainly something that I think infiltrating a lot of my own work when it comes to and
Yeah.
animates a lot of my work when it comes to like the way that landscape shows up in my own poems. And so it's something that I'm still constantly thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, I heard you say one line of yours that stuck out to me, and forgive me if I misquoted a bit. Everyone is haunted by something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I see that haunting in your poems, and it's something that I think I identify with as well. There's sort of what's happening in a place, but there's also like what is under the surface, and that might be personally what's under the surface, it might be culturally and socially what's under the surface, and it might be historically what's under the surface. But I mean, I think, I mean, for me, I feel like very comfortable both in the natural environment and the built environment. And I think that there's like sort of an unnatural separation. I don't know if it's an unnatural separation, but there's like this separation that happens, right?
Yeah.
And I think that separation is strategic to like keep people apart and like keep them in their box and keep them in their place. So for me, it's really important to be equally at home in many different environments and to find joy and pleasure in many different environments, because I belong in all those different environments. I'm allowed to be in all those different spaces in ways that maybe historically wasn't true.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always want to fight towards that, right? Like, I think that's what's so important about like the recent flowering of Black poetry is like Black poetry is what Black people are. So it can be anything, right?
Yeah.
It's not, there's not an aesthetic. There's a tradition maybe, but I think that tradition is opening up into new realms with every new book that's published,
Yeah, yeah, and we're seeing like I think like so much good work that's showing up in the world. Of course, shout out to include, my buddy Ian's book, which there'll be more links to it. If you don't have it, you should get it. Which you should absolutely do it.
We're talking a lot, so I'm going to read a poem. I get antsy when there's too much theory and not enough practice. But I want to pick up on something that you were saying earlier about, and it came out in your poem, like and someone in the chat pointing this line out. It's like history and its despairs, but also its joys.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that tension in finishing this book, that tension became really important to me. Like I think my poems, as you heard, are where I go to like work out the darkest things, right? Like the things that my anxieties, my fears, my sense of that something is unfair. But I feel like it's become a limitation, right? I'm not bringing my whole self to the poem. So I did try to write towards joy as in the last poem, but I think that I always want there to be a balance between what is difficult and fraught and what is joyful, because otherwise the joy doesn't feel authentic to me. It doesn't feel earned. So I wanted to read one. I only have like 2 happy poems, so I want to make sure I hit them both tonight.
I love that.
This is a poem that like I love graduation, but I love rowdy graduations. If I'm at graduation, we're gonna get loud for the person I'm there to support. But that's not how everyone views. Like some people like the pomp and circumstance and the quiet and the decorum of graduation. Frequency and amplitude. The child sang. I have known this volume in my life. I am fluent in it. They heard the man when he instructed the crowd to Please hold your applause until all graduates have crossed the stage. They, mothers, sisters, aunties, cousins, ignored him willfully. Their child, on top of the usual high school bullshit, homework and hormones, dealt every day with barbed wire eyes, policing their every movement through the hallways. Should the child be here? Is the child smart enough? If smart enough, quiet and disciplined enough, humble and low enough, look you in the eye and say hello enough. Every day, the child dodged rubber erasers aimed at her silhouette. Every day, the mockery of skin, of lips and nose, of the body's contours where it rounds the hips. And the history of hair stories, box braids or locks, every day pulled on as if the lead chain to a coffle. Bow your head and walk this way. Their child. They heard please hold and were loud nevertheless. Erupted, rattled the rafters, shook the white man portraits lining the wall into the auditorium. They did what all of us should do. Send up everyday praise for the child. Sing the child's survival every day. Every day, act the fool until the child is all grin and teeth and shaking a head in mock embarrassment. That is an acknowledgement of love. An acknowledgement that whatever broken glass is set into the next wall to be scaled. When the child's name is called, there will always and every day be a loudness from the back. Joy and bulwark against ruin. Joy and bulwark against rack.
I love that poem so much. Anytime you read it, and I know the kinds of graduations that you're talking about. I love those graduations that you're talking about. And I think just getting back to this this kind of dichotomy between like joy and the challenges of just being a human in this world, and certainly of just being alive and trying to make a life with your loved ones. I'm just gonna read this poem, also something of a pastoral poem, but I think is getting at some of the pastoral talk that we were gesturing at a little bit earlier. This poem is titled "Had the Gall to Take My Black Ass Raspberry Picking," which of course I do with my kids. So had the gall to take my black ass raspberry picking. Summer still. Summer, and what better to do with children in Western Mass? Plus, my daughter loves raspberries, especially the one inside my wife's elbow, though to pluck it might take all the ingenuity she can muster. So much she has yet to understand. So yes, I went, or went along at least. The raspberry bushes farther off in the field, back by the bigger trees, the owner told us, where shadow seemed to gather almost as though it had something planned. Clear plastic containers the owner gave us for picking. From possibly 100 years ago, the farm in her family's hands that long, the way so much history is held, kept. How long had they fastened rope to these things, I wondered. You could wear them like a yoke if you needed your hands free. If you want, she said. Don't worry. We'd never let our daughter wear this thing around her neck like some animal. And here is where I should say we didn't wear it either, my wife, me, but we did. I hate to admit it was easier to just wear them while picking the raspberries, but of course it was. So that's what I'm doing in Western Mass there, Ian.
Picking those raspberries. You know what I love about that? I mean, I love many things about the poem, but hearing it this time, I was really struck by because one thing I think about a lot is like in political work or work that is, making some sort of social commentary, there's this tendency to not, I hate the word didactic because I think it gets thrown around pejoratively, but there's this like desire to make an urgent point and like really explain yourself clearly and directly, which I think is a lot of the purpose of political discourse, right? And there's like a moral clarity to that I appreciate, but also find suspect in myself. And so I love in that poem how you become complicit in this thing, right? You go along to get along. In a way. Could you talk a little bit about that choice that you made and like where that comes from?
Yeah, I've been really struck by, and I think I want to say that this came up in the Huckleberry Finn poem too, where you have that sort of like that shift towards the end where the speaker ultimately like it makes that explanation of, well, the dog's gotta have a lot of space to run around and be with other dogs, like in that same way the speaker becomes just as complicit as those who are like of enacting this kind of like softening that, say, changing the N word out of Huck Finn for the word slave in these contemporary versions so that it is somehow more palatable for us to read. But I think in large part I'm interested more and more in poems in which, and I don't think any of my work has ever tried to position me or the poet speaker like that who is very much akin to myself like as a hero. I've never been sort of like interested in that because I think that maybe that could work for some people, but I think I find poems to be more human when they embrace doubt, when they embrace uncertainty, when they like embrace or even are able to bear their own flaws and bear their scars and bear some of the difficulties and the challenges, and also like the recognition that that in some ways certainly I have to think about the ways that I am complicit in just what like in how I participate in this world and in this space. And I think that like making the choice to do that in some part has to do with coming out of like both of us have a relationship to the Poetry Foundation Cave Canem. There's some other Cave Canem folk who are also on the call tonight, which is wonderful. Shout outs to Cave Canem. But among the mantras of Cave Canem, as you know, is this notion of like write the hard poem.
Right.
Which is not all like I don't always, which I want to say to everyone, I don't always just sit down at my desk with the intention of like writing the hard poem. But I do find that exploring maybe some more nuanced or complicated truths is what I have tended to find to be far more satisfying and gratifying, like when I'm able to read that work out, and especially as I see there ends up being kind of resonances with some of that work as well. But I think making that choice is really about like revealing a kind of humanity, but also I think it's that humanness, the humanness of being flawed, the humanness of possibly being wrong, that also lends itself to creating that empathic link between writer and reader that we so hope is going to happen, which is part of the reason that we go to the page. I think Ed Hirsch calls it of the lyric. He talks about it as like one solitude, sort of like one solitude speaking to another solitude, which I like that way of putting it as well. Are you seeing any of that sort of rhetorical moves sort of showing up in your own work, especially as you're interrogating, as you're interrogating so much of America, like and doing it from within?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I'm increasingly, because I think about accessibility a lot, and I think sometimes critics use accessibility again and pejoratively, but I use it positively.
It's like
I do want you to access my poem in some level. Like, yeah, you might have to do a little work. There might be a little rigor involved, but at the end of the day, I want it to be comprehensible to you on some level. As you were talking, I realized that like wanting to show that those flaws, the doubts, the uncertainty is an accessibility issue, right? Because it shows me as similar to everyone has those flaws, those doubts, those uncertainties, right? And I think then it opens the poem up, right, to the reader. I think though that does exist in tension for me with like times where I'm like, hey world, like you're doing the wrong thing, knock it off, right? So I have that like, I don't know, like fatherly, school teacherly like thing where I'm just like, knock it off, like stop doing it, right? Which I think can be like a little high-handed and again maybe didactic, whatever that word means. So I think, and I think it comes from, I think there are like many poems that I write after, that are dealing with things that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, right? And then there's times when I'm just like in the moment and I'm like, this is something happened and you need to know about it. Like I need to tell you about this, right? And I think that comes from, like, I was interested in like how history just keeps bubbling up in your work. It keeps coming to the surface. And I think I see some of my role as a poet as archival, right? As a record keeper, right? To and as our archivist to like pull on old histories, but also keep a record of the current history so that it can't be, so that at least my narrative is part of the consideration as that history is told and retold in the future. Do you feel that?
I think so.
Archival impulse?
Definitely like archival for sure. And one of the things that it reminds me of a conversation that I was having with the poet John Murillo at one point. He was giving a virtual reading at Smith College, and I was doing a Q&A with him after the reading, which was a lot of fun. It was during COVID, or at least at the height of COVID. And one of the questions that I had for him had to do with, it was thinking about his long poem, the Eric Dolphy poem, that's sort of like thinking about the jazz man, but also it's turning its attention to the 92 rebellions in LA and like, and I was, it was like the book in and of itself is 10 years in the making. And like that also happened in 92 and his book is coming out, coming out in 2020. Right. And so I asked him about this notion of like going back to something like that, versus, like there's so many writers that when something happens and when something like particularly of note happens in like our current stage, like they want to be the first to get a poem out there about that thing. Right. Like I was, they want to either start the conversation or like be like, or really be kind of, sort of guiding the conversation or at least, or directing it in some way. And I was, asking him about like, how do you like handle or think about that impulse of like, of catching on to like a hot moment. And his notion was just like, forget a hot moment, like he was saying that like sadly, like so many of the things about, and I think I share his opinion in this, that so much of what we experience in the world and what we experience in our lives, sadly just doesn't change. That like war just doesn't change, and like poverty, it doesn't. I mean, these are things that we want to be different and things that we want to change. But like the effects of racism and racial terror, like those things just like they just don't change. And so this idea of being able to feeling confident in taking one's time, and feeling as though if I die, like I don't have to write COVID poems in the like while COVID's going on, right? Like I don't have to write it in the height. Like for some people they have to do that. But I do think that like I appreciate what you said about some of the role of the poet as archivist, as like chronicler of what it has meant to be alive. But and also like in as much as we think about like what enters the frame of a poem, we also are having to think about like what else is outside of it that doesn't enter into the frame. I was, when someone, I think I was reading an interview from interview by Carl Phillips at some point, and he was saying that people were kept asking him about like, where's your 9/11 poem? And his response was that like every poem that's written after 9/11 is a 9/11 poem, like in the
Right.
sense that like that's going to constantly be in the background informing what it makes it into the poem, but then also like what ultimately ends up being left out of it. So yeah, I think about that a lot, and history was not a subject I liked when I was in school. It was,
I mean, did that have something to do with how it was taught and like
it's probably
what was taught in it?
it's probably that, like probably what was
Right.
taught in it, how it was taught, like and that it really was based off of, I think in the same way that a lot of your like your primary like English school course, it's like it ends up being this memorization loop of
Right.
like, yeah, you got to memorize these dates, you got to memorize who
It's
this
not a
person was.
discourse about what happened, what are the different perspectives of this moment, right? Which
yeah,
is ultimately what makes history interesting, right? History is interpreted as just as much as literature. History is an interpretive exercise.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, and that it's also like one of the things that it's also consensus too, right? It's consensus based in a way that like people like we get enough people to agree that this is what happened, that then this is what becomes the historical moment, which is just like yeah, like this idea of consensus as one of the inferences of history as well.
Sorry, my battery's about to die, y'all. Being
Don't do,
applaud
don't do that. Yeah, I just have like speaking of trees, my children think I'm a tree, is what it is.
Yeah, they're climbing you.
Yeah, oh, all the time.
I've been climbed in my time.
Has it and I know that we're getting to a point where we're going to open it up for some for questions as
Yeah.
well. But I was also curious about like obviously my kids are younger than yours, or at least these two little ones are younger than yours. Has have you felt like your work has changed like between books, like as your kids have gotten older? Have you seen that also like obviously like enter into like how you're approaching the poem? Because clearly that's going to always obviously be in your mind, especially when you're thinking about America and what America has done with Black boys.
Yeah. Um,
But as they are growing into young men, you know.
yeah. I mean, I think about it. Yeah, that could be the subject of a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast that we do together. Yeah, it has. This has always been true. For me, like the moment that they came into the world, like my capacity for feeling expanded on both ends, right? So my capacity for fear and my capacity for joy
Yeah.
expanded, and I think that has come through in the poems as well. And it's some of why I feel some of the urgency of the political moment so much is because, um, like there's a world in the most dire case, right? Like my kids get wiped off the face of the earth, get exterminated or something, right? Across multiple variables of their identity, right? Vectors of their identity. And so I feel more urgency. Like, I hear what you and John are saying about like taking your time and reflecting, and like there's certain things that will always sort of be there. But I think more and more I feel called to like, if there's something that strikes me in the moment, I feel more and more called to write about it. I mean, that said, there's so much, like if I tried to write about everything that like, I mean, it's just coming so fast and so furious right now that you can't write about it all. You would just burn yourself out, right? And like, you can't write a hard poem about everything that happened.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I get that. I don't think every poet should just be there being a journalist and on a daily basis, like writing a sonnet about like the latest outrage of the
yeah,
government. But I do think that there's a balance between reflection and urgency, right? Across like a collection, right?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
like, there's a balance of poems that kind of speak to the moment.
I was just
Um,
thinking that there's probably like a book out there, that there's a book somewhere like out there amongst the folks that like is just it's just going to end up being this sort of like erasure or collage project of like all of the executive orders. Like it's just going to be
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, which is which I think is going to be which will be like really really great. But but I definitely want to have that conversation with you at some point because it's certainly something I think about with my young girls. Like, and I'm constantly like having to,
Becca coming on tells me that we're
yeah,
going to answer audience questions. Can I
yeah,
read?
let's
Can we
do
each
it.
read one more poem before we do that?
Do you want to do that after we get through these two
Sure.
questions? Because
Yeah,
we
yeah.
only have two, and I think it'd be really
Okay.
awesome to close out with a
Right.
poem.
Awesome.
Sounds
Sounds
So the
good.
first question I have is from Cheney.
That's why you're on the show.
The first question is from Cheney. Could we ask, what is the pre-poem process? So when you come to your desk, is it a response to an event, a feeling, idea, or place? Is there a dominant incentive, a sense of muse?
That's a great question, Cheney. Yeah, I mean, I would probably put myself in the muse category. I call it white hot inspiration. I think there are just moments when I I see something, I read something, I think something, I see something, and then like all of a sudden I'm in that poetic space, and it's like the only thing that I can do. And if you try to come near me, you're not getting a response until like that first draft is down, and you could be waiting 15 minutes, you could be waiting 3 hours, you know. Um, but I usually first drafts are usually I rarely sit down and say like I'm going to write a poem today, right? I will say I'm going to revise and try to improve this poem in these ways, and I think I'm more purposeful and structured and disciplined in that way. But that initial draft is often as a result of reading and thinking and observing, and then something pops and I'm gone. I often find it's when my mind is relaxed. So reading, driving, running or walking, right? Like when those things happen, like my subconscious or I don't know the brain and the mind, but like subconscious, unconscious, whatever, kind of kicks in and takes off, right?
Yeah, I'm, and thank you for that, Cheney. I think my process is somewhat similar in the sense of like, I often hear lines of poetry, something that's going to start a poem or something that maybe it's the title of something. It's usually like when I'm walking the dog or I'm in the shower or something like that. It's like, it's not necessarily when I'm actively like sitting at the desk is when it's happening. But I tend to be like, and when I get that like that little kernel that I feel like there might be something worth pursuing there or that I'm following. I am very much I'm very much someone who is like a big time like note taker, and I tend to keep a lot like I tend to collect things. Like I'm very magpie-ish in that way of like, I get a bit of red string here, get a bit of tinsel there, here's a twig, here's this bit of leaf. Know I don't necessarily know that I'm building the nest until like much later that in the process, but that there are these pieces that are seemingly coming together. And so to some respects, my work like can sometimes feel collage-ish sometimes because it's often gathering materials from various moments of hearing something, like hearing the music of a line or overhearing something that someone said and writing that down and then maybe pursuing that. I'm a fairly extensive like note taker and notebook keeper, and those returning to those pretty often. I and getting better at being able to see lines within lines and poems within poems,
Mhm.
stanzas within stanzas, poems within poems. That's really helped me in being able to ultimately discover what like when work is happening.
Yeah. I think that's a big difference between like the more I write, the more I can visualize the line breaks as I'm kind of repeating poems in my head or saying them aloud to myself. I can see where the stanzas and the lines are breaking with like the deeper you get into the practice.
Yeah, and I find that some things I'll work on in my head for a really long time. Like I'll hold it there and I'm just turning the thing over and over again. And it isn't until like I put it down on the page, like I put it down in my notebook or something like that, that then it's finally gone. Which whereas I
Right.
know for others, and this doesn't happen all the time. I'm sure that there are some things that I'm sure I've forgotten plenty of fire poems, and they're just gone forever. But yeah,
You
I
got a
think
whole
that the
anthology, you got a whole like
the forgotten
new and
poems
collected works full of fire poems that you let go out of your mind.
that I just let go just because I didn't have a notebook by my bed that night. Yeah, and so like I think that's like yeah, that tends to be a really interesting way of working on it. And I think yeah, the longer that I've been in the practice, the better at like the being better at being able to see what other structural opportunities has been like really huge for me. Like
Right.
being able to really be experimental with structure and not being afraid of like messing a poem up, right? Like,
Exactly.
like it's like first impulse isn't always necessarily best impulse and you keep your drafts. And so if you mess it up, go back to the other version. Like I'm always happy to I like my students are all my creative writing students are always like so precious about their work. I'm just like copy it, make a copy of it. You can always go back to it if you like, but mess it up. Like see what else is there.
Right. Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't know the possibilities until you push the boundaries of it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think this next question kind of is really intersects with what Cheney asked. And it's about kind of that writing as an act of discovery and
Yeah.
revelation. This is from Malika Booker. Um, do you ever get into that space where you're kind of in almost like a trance where the words just kind of come from somewhere and you're not necessarily in control, or at least the editor brain is not in control? Um, what does that feel like to you, and how does it manifest if it does at all?
Yeah, that's why our
Rebecca, can
this
you repeat the first part of that question?
So I'll read actually the
Okay.
whole thing. I was trying to paraphrase it a little bit. Sometimes the act of composing seems to be a writing into the unknown, where the action of writing is actually one of discovery and revelation, and the language seems possessed to possess the writer, encouraging a sort of trance where the writer does not seem to be in control. Does that happen for you, and what does it feel like, and how does it manifest for you at all?
I would say, and this is our like, and shout out, much love to Malika who's joining us from the UK, which is like really awesome. Dear, 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 dear heart and soul there. It is very rare that like I get a poem that sort of like that comes out in that sort of like trance sort of fashion where it comes out and seemingly is like pretty much fully formed and maybe has like a little bit of like some tweaking to do to it. And it's funny that with those poems, those are the poems that I tend to let sit the longest before doing anything with them because I don't trust them. I like never trust them like that because I was like that seemed like that came like far too easy. So that can't be a poem or it can't be a good poem. And like it's like it's certainly there's got to be something more complicated to this. There's got to be something more something of more like of deeper nuance and interest. And so like it is rare. I think in the two books that I have, I could say that it has happened to me maybe a handful of times, if not less than a handful of times, that I've kind of had that event as well.
Yeah, I think it happens for me more often. I think that's what I like that state of white hot and what I call white hot inspiration to me is like falling into like sometimes I'm just at it and I lose track of time. I lose track of everything, and I'm just puzzling through the language and the image. And I really love those moments. But I do, I mean, I think poems are, for me, poems are made in revision, as, you know, which is not revelatory to say. So I think for me, revision has this tension in that I want that quality of the poems that Malika so beautifully described, of the sense that the poet is lost in the language. I think that's some of the trick of revision, because poetry has artifice. You know, there's artifice in poetry, right? Some of it is creating the sense that you're lost in language, even though you're highly controlled in your language use. And I think that for me, that's the difficulty and the joy of revision, is trying to approximate that, and creating those like little runs and riffs where the language seems to be driving the poem more than the poet is driving the poem. Yeah, so I think I love the idea of poem as discovery, of writing towards the unknown. But even in those moments where I have a place where I want to end, I do want there to be like a journey there, like maybe a meandering, or maybe like some stutter step, right? Some hopping and skipping on the way there, where you're sort of lost in the language.
Yeah, that is just that discovery aspect of it, I think is crucial. Like if I know where a poem is going, like if I know all like everything there is to know about said poem, if there is no sense of like surprise or discovery, then I don't know that that's a poem that I necessarily need to write, because I've already figured everything out about the situation. Like I think it was Lucille Clifton who talks about like I write out of like I write to find out, or I write out of what I wonder about.
Right.
And your what you were saying too, Ian, also reminds me of there was a quote. There was Elizabeth Bishop has this thing that she says, and she mentions that like what we want from poetry, and what we want from like what we want from poetry is the same, or what she wants from poetry is the same thing that we want from all great art. That, and she describes it as a perfectly useless concentration, which I think to my mind is like it's really one of the closest ways that we can get to eternity. It's like that moment, like when you get to that moment where you're like, oh man, 4 hours is gone. And I was just like here working on this point. Like, where did that go? I feel like
Right.
that perfectly useless concentration is like I feel like it's the closest we get to like living forever, or like that moment of eternity.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in and say that we have about 8 minutes left. So if you want to close out with some poems, that would be super awesome.
Cool. You want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. I can start it off. Just based off of Malika's question, I'm going to read one of those poems that kind of like that ended up that came out like almost like fully formed. It was a poem that certainly surfaced on a drive, on a road trip that my wife and I were taking, and we were passing by, I think, on like a major sort of like U.S. Highway, and we were passing by, I want to say like Angola prison or something like that. You could see it off in the distance, and suddenly like this thing just started to unravel for me, and I like wrote it down. I was the passenger at the time, and this poem just came out, and not much has changed about it. It's titled "The Sentence." The sentence begins with its subject, which is the sentence. Track the sentence to find out what happens or how it will act. It is the subject, after all. To track, meaning keep an eye on, which is synecdoche, part representing the whole of a thing. One may track a package if he pleases. One may track a person, though you'd probably want the whole of him, not only an eye, or perhaps only an I. Look how the sentence is so capable of embracing contraction. A him may function as a subject, but that depends upon the sentence, i.e., a man is subject to his sentence. You understand. Such syntax renders it like a package showing evidence of having been tampered with. And maybe I'll read one more before I toss it over to Ian. This poem is among the things that our family has really loved to do, and it's become a kind of tradition for us, is that wherever we go, we do a lot of road tripping. Wherever we go, we always try to find good diners. We love diner food. We're raising our kids to really love diner food, and so um, this poem is titled "Poem from a Rest Stop Diner." It has an epigraph from Robert Graves that reads, "There is one story and one story only." Poem from a rest stop diner, which ends up being the same diner and the same men licking the same finger before turning the page of yesterday's paper. Always reading yesterday's paper because it costs so little to look back. To have your mug refilled with black coffee, cooled under a ceiling fan's spin. Nothing is unexpected, and it's absolutely perfect. Down to the waitress wearing her name permanently marked on a plastic heart she's pinned over her heart. Her finger slipped in the ceramic ring of the mug. The bill, like a whisper, tucked beneath your plate. The bell at the host stand, the little girl smacking it, though not to get anyone's attention, just to hear it sing. The same song, the only song it knows. Thanks, folks.
I thought it was funny that you qualified that you were the passenger in the car when you were coming up with that poem, because I have definitely like had the steering wheel, the pen, and a piece of paper. That was when I was like, this poetry shit has gone too far, man. I gotta either start
Yeah.
memorizing it or
Yeah, I figured I had to clarify that.
yeah. I appreciate it. I also thought it was just funny the idea of like Robert Graves and a diner being in conversation. I'll end with two poems too. I might take us a little over time. I apologize for that. Thanks for spending this time with us. I think both of these poems are kind of flow naturally out of the conversation we were having. They both, in their own way, I think, are about being a father. Or the first one is very explicitly a poem about fatherhood, and one of my big worries is like that I will lose my children, that in the process of trying to raise them, I will push them away and they will move away from me. The second one I think is more like an intersection of the personal and the political. Like there's a very, I think, political purpose to the poem, but underneath it are some of those parental and personal worries about my children. The first one is titled Ward Pound Ridge, which is a nature preserve, which is about across the county from me. Ward Pound Ridge. My older son holds a rotting chunk of fallen birchwood. He explains that the fungi in the chunk of birch turn the wood blue. Below us, a creek bends blue and north to run in the same direction as the trail. The creek holds on to a fringe of ice that has not melted in the rare warmth of this day. Water tumbles from under the fringe and courses over smoothing stones fixed in the creek bed. For the moment, I want to know from my son and the water the alchemy and astronomy of all things. But then, tossing the birch into leaf fall, he sprints along the trail, drops down the slope, and in a moment is gone into graylit forest I know must be there, but cannot see. And I'll end with the title poem of the collection, All the Possible Bodies, which was written in response. This is, for me, this is like a poem of the moment. And so it's written about George Floyd's murder, and in conversation with the story that my mother told me about her own father shortly after George Floyd was murdered, and also in conversation with, again, my own fears as a parent. And so it's thinking about George Floyd as actual father and potential father as well. And there's one fact in here that was reported one way initially, but then changed during the court case. Like, the facts were different, but I kept the initial fact, again, out of that sort of archival desire to record and write in the moment. All the possible bodies. My alcoholic grandfather couldn't hold his money and passed a bad check. Hampton, Virginia, after Brown versus Board, but before Selma's Bloody Sunday. After my grandmother died, but before he moved the family north, back to the town of his birth. My mother saw her father cuffed and dragged from the house. The next day, by some miracle she never understood, he came home. Had he looked at the officers wrong, acted wrong, spoken wrong, been too familiar, been a few inches taller, been deeper voiced or darker skinned, and for this, had he caught a knee that night to the neck and not returned, perhaps my mother, needing to stay home and raise Aunt Joan and Uncle Keith, would have skipped college. Had she skipped college, perhaps she would not have gone for a PhD. Had she not gone for a PhD, perhaps she would not have met my father. Had she not met my father, perhaps I would not be here. Perhaps the boys, sleeping upstairs from me now, would not be here. When you spend 8 minutes and 46 seconds with your knee on another man's neck, you block not just the passage of air into his body, but block air into all the possible bodies dependent on that man and his neck to breathe, 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 breathe. Thank you all. Thank you to Rebecca and Lisa for having us in this space and for creating this space. You all should join the series, join the movement, come every month.
There's tons of archived conversations that are, and they're all like very different in how they're structured. And so this is just a beautiful series, and we're just honored to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much.
You.
And thank you all for coming and hanging out, spending this time with us.
Yeah.
Don't take it lightly these days, just to be, even if it's virtual, just to be in community and in conversation with y'all.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. We dropped a few links in the chat. We have one more event in 2025. We would also love your help in planning 2026. We're asking for some input about what you want to see so that we can continue to improve and evolve. So if you have a moment, we would love your input there. If you'd like to unmute and give a round of applause or say something nice to Iain and Nathan, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, we're going to say goodnight because we know we're a couple minutes over. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Grateful for your being here.
For you, Nathan, thank you.
Yeah,
always
Iain,
good to be in conversation with you.
Congratulations again, brother. Really excited about the book, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and can't wait to do some other readings with you on it.
Yeah,
too.
in person.
Yeah,
we'll get there.
Oh, that'll be great.